people think that radical candor is all about criticism, but really praise is more important because it's the art of possibility.
How do you say what you mean without being mean? Kim Scott answered that question with Radical Candor, a book that's been translated into 20 languages and became the #1 most recommended leadership book on Lenny's podcast. She's coached CEOs at Google, Apple, Dropbox, and Twitter. Today, Kim talks with us about what leadership looks like when the stakes are the highest they've ever been, and why caring personally isn't soft. It's a survival strategy. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much. I'm excited for this conversation.
So great to have you. So, Kim, before we get into the meat of it all, you managed a pediatric clinic in
Kosovo, yes.
And you started a diamond cutting factory in Moscow?
In Moscow in 1990, yeah.
Yes. So what is it about you that keeps you running towards all these hard things? Tell us more.
One of my flaws is that I get bored easily, and so I need to keep life exciting. And so I moved to Moscow I studied Russian literature, an extremely valuable and practical major. And so what do you do with that? You move to Moscow. So I moved to Moscow, and that was how I wound up, through a friend of a friend, starting the diamond cutting factory. This was when it was still the Soviet Union. And that turned out to be my first management job, my first foray. And I sort of thought, business is boring. All you do is you pay people. And no, it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. And I learned that early on from these Russian diamond cutters who I was trying to hire. And I thought, this is going to be so easy. I'm going to pay them in dollars. I'm going to wind up paying them, 100 times more than they were getting paid by the government. And it turned out money wasn't enough. They wanted to know someone cared about them. And that was kind of the moment back in, I guess that was 1992, when I was like, management is kind of interesting, actually.
And you were very young then.
23 or 24.
Yeah.
I think that it's really a good idea to manage early. I think a lot of the people who I've met who are great leaders of people are from the military. And I think part of the reason is that the military is very good at leadership training, but also they give people experience when they're super young, leading large numbers of people.
So we had a previous guest, Kieran Snyder.
Oh, I love Kieran.
Yeah. And our episode 10, so an early guest.
Okay.
How do you know Kieran?
I read her article about the abrasive problem, and I just reached out to her. I was like, this is it. I love this. I think I was the CEO coach at Twitter when it came out. And there was such a big thread at Twitter from all the women and the men. I mean, not just the women, but there was a lot of it resonated emotionally, shall we say, for the women. And I reached out to her. I was like, we got to do this. Is incredible. This is so important.
She credits you with letting her know what her gift was, because you were the one who really encouraged her to be a viral data storyteller. She called you a mensch. And we think that's just so important that, not only do people have different gifts, but that there are people in this world that will let you know that you have a gift.
Yes, that's radically candid praise. Like people think that radical candor is all about criticism, but really praise is more important because it's the art of possibility.
I think that's really like that. There's something really powerful there because there's two things to that. One is identifying and recognizing it, right? And Amy and I talk about this a lot, about being able to observe and think about what people's gifts are and how that plays to being a good leader. But then to your other point, being inclined to say it to someone. Oftentimes we have these observations about people, but maybe we don't say it out loud, and maybe we don't tell them that that's unusual because, of course, most of us, when we have a gift, think, well, it's easy. That's just something that happens. And it's like, no, that's special about you. That's something that happens for you, and you need to do more of that because the world needs more of your gifts. So I love that radical candor in the side of focusing on not just observing people, but connecting it towards them in a way that they can use it in the future. That's really cool.
Yeah, because often when a person is good at something, they don't realize that it's unusual.
Yeah.
They don't realize how awesome it is because this is just how they go through their day. And so helping them notice that what you're able to do there is actually a gift to the world.
That's right.
Yeah. And thank you for reaching out to Kieran because her data stories are a gift to the world. So
They are gifts to the world.
Especially
Yes.
right now where we're
Yeah.
all so confused as to what's happening. It's really nice to have someone quantifying what they're saying.
Speaking of telling people what they need to hear, you wrote a remarkable piece in the New York Times a few months ago, I think it was in October, about Silicon Valley's silence against authoritarian inklings and how that connected back to your experience in Russia.
Yeah.
So what compelled you to write that? And I think you said in it that you weren't courageous, but everybody thought you were courageous. So tell us more about that.
So as I mentioned, my first job out of college was in what was then the Soviet Union. And so I had an experience with an authoritarian government. And the thing that really struck me at the time was everything I did was recorded by the government. And I thought, it doesn't really matter. It's not like they're going to arrest me. I'm an American citizen. This isn't impacting me. Who cares that it's all recorded? Who cares that? And then I would often call home every Sunday night and talk to my parents. And then I was in New York and my parents lived in Memphis. And I called them from New York and I realized I was speaking very differently to them because it wasn't being recorded. And I realized how insidious censorship is and surveillance is and that and it wasn't even the purpose of censorship and surveillance and other authoritarian tactics is not even that they're going to control you. You're going to censor yourself. You're going to control, and that's really insidious. So I have been feeling like, kind of screaming into the void, like a lot of us. And I feel like I came to Silicon Valley because I love it. And here's what I love about, it's not perfect. No place is, no. But here's what I love about tech and about Silicon Valley. It's a group of people who love hard problems and they want to solve those hard problems in service of making the world a better place. That's the best of us. That's not always what's happening, but that's the best of it. And so many people who I know from my career in tech are incredibly idealistic people who are dedicated to making the world a better place. And I don't understand why we have given the bullhorn to Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, who are not committed to making the world a better place for anybody other than themselves, as far as I can tell. I don't know either one of them, so maybe that's unfair. But I think that it's important for people to get loud and to complain about this turn towards authoritarianism. Like when I started writing Radical Candor, it was sort of, I thought we all agreed that telling people what to do doesn't work, that an authoritarian regime is not going to get the best innovation out of a group of people. And what I thought we all agreed on, I realize now we don't. And so it's time to get loud about that and to complain about what ICE is doing in Minneapolis and to complain loudly and not to go and bend the knee to Donald Trump. Some people agree with what he's doing, but if you disagree, speak out, say so. And why aren't more people doing that? It's driving me a little bonkers, as you can tell from my rant.
And, I think both in your piece as well as like in your podcast, you talk a lot about like how weepy you would get because of like this mission statement and this like S corp, filing, like just like the missions of the past, and where is that now with and is becoming a billionaire or a 10 or 100 billionaire, is that so corrupting that people can no longer actually care about the broader good of humanity, that they can really only care about themselves and their specific shareholders, right? Like,
if I had to boil down something's not right in the state of Denmark, and even defining what's wrong seems like a big challenge because there's so many things that seem wrong. But if I did have to boil it down to a sentence, I would say the problem is too much money in too few hands. And not because all of those people are evil, but because we have an economic system that's like a runaway freight train of a rich get richer algorithm. And when the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class is getting squeezed. And an economy doesn't work well if everybody can't participate. So I think we'll all be better. And this is not the first time in history this has happened. And generally in history, when you have this runaway rich get richer algorithm, three things come along to solve the problem: a revolution, an economic cataclysm, or a war. And I would like to think that we've seen this story often enough. We've seen this play often enough that we know those are really not the best ways to solve the problem. And I would like to think we could get out ahead of it and figure out how to solve the problem. And I believe it's in everyone's interest.
I think I want to come back a little bit, though, to the idea of role modeling courage and showing people how to speak up for the things that matter to them. So I think we've seen tremendous courage in Minneapolis. I think we've seen tremendous courage in support of that. I think we have seen courage with Anthropic drawing a hard line with the Department of Defense. I think we have seen courage show up in a few places. I think that your call to action is so important, that it is really important in this moment that we don't self-censor in a way that starts to diminish our own core values. I think that, to me, is the piece that is so, urgent in my mind, is that I think we have to use our voices to not only highlight things that are, counter to the depressing narratives, but also to remind ourselves that grounding in our own values really matters more now than ever before. Because if we allow ourselves to become neutral takes us along into a path that is giving up stuff that's important to us, our own humanity.
You can't be neutral on a moving train.
Right.
You got to, at some point, pull the emergency brake.
That's right.
Because the train is going somewhere. One of the things I wrote in that op-ed was that it feels like courage and wealth are negatively correlated right now.
Oh, I love that. I love that quote. Yeah.
And you kind of see that in Minneapolis. The people who are being so courageous are not necessarily the wealthiest. Rather than criticizing other people, I like to criticize myself. So I'll give you an example of a time when I was not courageous because there was a bad ROI on doing so. And I think it's instructive because this happened, I think, to a lot of people. So I was at a large company, and my boss at that large company said I was suffering from a competence. I'm telling the story in maybe not exactly how it happened, but a funny way. So my boss at this company said that I was suffering from the competence-likability bias, which that really did happen. And I really didn't know what it was. I was like, what is that? It's like the more competent a woman is, the less likely she is to be liked. And I was like, gosh,
Felt that before.
yeah, that rings true. That's a real thing. And I was thinking, oh, he gets it. He's going to help me solve this problem. That's where I was wrong. It's like, so I need you to be more likable. And then
Here's a stupid pill.
Yeah, here's a stupid, less competent and more, but worse than that, he then decided the thing that I could do to be more likable was to be more fashionable. And he sent someone out to buy me the tightest pair of pants. And I had just had twins. The tightest pair of pants I had ever had in my career and in my life. Like, I don't wear tight jeans. I'm uncomfortable in tight jeans. And that was weird. And then I didn't wear them because I felt ridiculous in them. And he pulled me into his office again and he said, I think I have the solution to your competence-likability problem. I'm like, do tell. What's coming next? I wear a bikini to work. And he said, I'm going to give you a demotion, but I'm not, yes. So
How old was this boss? Just so that I can
he
have.
was not older than I was, really.
And how old were you?
I was probably 45.
Okay, so he
and
wasn't a
maybe
kid.
he was 50, and this was not that long ago.
So
I mean, I'm now
he was
58.
not
No, there's no
kid,
there's no
good reason. Okay.
Yeah. And so I quit that job. But I talked to two mentors, and one mentor said, don't blow up your career. Like, go get another job. You can make more money somewhere else anyway. And the other mentor told me that I should sue this $1 trillion company. And I was like, oh, what's the ROI for me? What's the better ROI? Suing them or just quitting and getting another job? And quitting and getting another job was the kind of rational thing for me. Like, I don't want to be too hard on but it was not the courageous thing for me to do. I was leaving behind a lot of other women who I was pretty far along in my career. I had the wherewithal. I could have fought this fight. I could have spoken out, and I did not. Instead, I went silently. And so I like to offer everybody a little compassion. Like I can understand for folks who are saying to themselves, there's not a good ROI on speaking out. But here's how I feel in retrospect. And so to the extent that The Power of Regret, one of Dan Pink's books, is important. And you want to prevent yourself from looking back in 10 years and feeling regret. I look back and I feel bad about the way that I handled that. I could have handled it better. And the reason why I feel bad is that I was losing my agency. And my agency is more important. Like, I had enough. No matter what I did, I was going to put food on the table, And so I think it's really important to realize that an ROI calculation is the wrong approach to these times. Because if we get war or revolution or an economic cataclysm, the ROI of speaking up now will look pretty damn good.
I love the fact that your real regret, and I think there's something really instructive in this as well, was less about the regret for yourself and more about the regret that you could have made it better or easier for people who came after.
Yeah.
And I think that's just exactly the way that I often look at it as well, in that things happening to me personally, I can usually get on board with kind of brushing off. But things where I realize that I'm setting a precedent in a way that does not make it better for people coming after feels like a fight worth fighting.
I remember a couple of years after that happened, Susan Rigetti wrote her memo, and then her book is somewhere on here, Whistleblower. And I remember reading her blog post and thinking, gosh, she's younger than I am. She's earlier in her career. It was riskier for her to do this than it would have been for me, and she did it anyway. And I remember feeling very inspired by her and thinking, I want to be more like Susan Rigetti.
I think we all recognize that when we are brave, when, for the right reasons, when we are brave, I think it's hard to describe the way that improves your own self-esteem and your own dignity.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I lost was my sense of agency. I mean, I got it back, and that's expensive. And I want to let's challenge us. Let's not call it courage, because I don't want to call people cowardly.
Oh, good point. Good point.
Because people have reasons right now for not, and it's not mere cowardice. I mean, it's fun to call people cowardly, but I think there's more to it than that. So I think it's interesting to think about, like, what are the long-term pros and cons of speaking out and trying to take more of a long-term view of what's happening for people.
And it's a hard choice, because it's not just money too. It's a lot, like, you would have been raked through the coals. Like, it would have been very psychologically difficult to go through. I mean, it's not just that you would have had a loss of future income. It would have taken a lot out of you. And granted, there's an upside of getting your agency back, but it could take a really long time to get that agency.
It's going to cost you something in the short term, probably. I mean, it's not going to cost me anything to write that op-ed, because I'm not a venture capitalist. I'm not trying to invest with those people. Like, there was very little downside for me of doing it. And there is more downside for other people. I just want to acknowledge that. But it's worth speaking out anyway. And in fact, after I wrote it, so many people who I've worked with at different parts of my career reached out to me, and we're getting together, and we're going to figure out how to get real loud. About 50 of us. Yeah.
Well
So
done.
cool.
You all are invited if you want to come.
Excellent. We're in.
Okay.
Yeah. We're in for sure.
Let's pivot over to your frameworks and talk about radical candor and then the evolution to respect as well. One thing that we've been thinking about, and it's very related but a little bit different, is that we're seeing this age happen where there's all this disruption, there's polarization, there's layoffs, there's reorgs, but there's also kind of this sense of, like, getting more masculine and getting more aggressive and that sort of thing. And there's never
founder mode.
Yes, founder mode. Yes. And, like, it seems like there's a real risk that this concept of radical candor could be used as a cover for just being aggressive.
A jerk.
Right. Yeah. And I'm a Taylor Swift fan, and she's got the great lyric of casually cruel in the name of being honest, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Whenever
that's what I call obnoxious aggression. And
whenever
candor.
I hear that, those lyrics, I'm thinking of this area. And so I'm wondering, Kim, what's happening, and, like, does this change anything about how you've presented radical candor? Has it evolved? Like, walk us through what we should be looking at for leaders now.
So radical candor came out in 2017. And even back then, I was getting some feedback that people were charging into a conference room and they're saying, in the spirit of radical candor, and then they would act like a garden variety jerk, which of course was not the spirit of radical candor. So in 2019, I published a second edition in which there is a new version of the framework, where in the upper right-hand quadrant is compassionate candor. And it's interesting to think about the difference between compassionate candor and ruinous empathy. Compassionate candor, you really care about this person, so you're going to tell them the truth. Whereas ruinous empathy is you're so sort of paralyzed by the fear of hurting someone's feelings or offending them that you say nothing, even if it's better off for them in the long run. And so even back then, there was a tendency to sort of misuse the idea of the book as an excuse to act like a jerk. I like to think anyway, if somebody actually read the book and not just the title of the book, that they would understand that care personally is a really important part. But early on, also, radical candor would sometimes get confused with Ray Dalio's radical transparency. And Ray Dalio is all challenged directly, almost no care personally. So I would put that in the obnoxious aggression quadrant. And so that's one thing that I have worked really hard to. I spend time on LinkedIn, and every time someone, I notice someone misusing it that way, I get in and I say something, even if only 10 people have seen that thing. So it's something I care, and I've written about it a lot. So it's something I care a lot about, not allowing radical candor to get misused as an excuse to act like a jerk.
Embedded in this, and going back to the positive side of the radical candor as well, I think there is a foundational assumption of understanding the person that you're having this interaction with. In order to build that care foundation, you have to be curious about them as a human. You have to be understanding of where they're coming from at some level, so that your candor can be used to a reasonable effect, whether it's to fix something or amplify something. And I wonder if you have some tips for leaders who maybe haven't yet gotten feedback or have gotten feedback about the fact that maybe they are not putting enough energy into that part of the trust building, and having that interest and willingness to figure out who the other person is and how they're showing up.
Yeah. I mean, the good news is that this is about these impromptu 2-minute conversations. All I would encourage people to do at the outset is just to notice what's going on for the other person. It can be so, like, the origin story of radical candor happened when I was walking a dog. I was living in Manhattan, and I had just gotten this new puppy, and I loved this new puppy, and I loved her so much that I had never said a cross word to her. And as a result, she was totally out of control. So I'm taking her for a walk. She's jumping all over the place. She jumped into the street right in front of a cab. I pulled her out of the way in the nick of time, and this cab whizzes by, and I'm standing on the street corner with my heart in my throat. And this man, a perfect stranger, looks at me and he says, "I can tell you really love that dog." That was all he had to do to move up on the care personally dimension. He didn't need to know my birthday or take me out to lunch or know my kids' names or anything like that. I can tell. That's all it is. It's noticing what's going on for the person. And then he says to me, "But you're going to kill that dog if you don't teach her to sit." So that's the challenge direct. And then he points at the ground with this kind of harsh gesture and he says, "Sit." Dog sat. I had no idea she even knew what that meant. And I kind of looked up at him in amazement, and he said to me, "It's not mean, it's clear." And then the light changed and he walked off, leaving me with words to live by. So
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You don't have to invite all your employees in to lie down on your couch and tell you, but what you do have to know how to do is to just pause and notice what's going on for that person as a human being in the moment. One time I used to take these walks with Andy Grove, who was a neighbor.
Oh, nice little humble brag there.
Yes, the CEO. And he said to me that a journalist had reached out to him and wanted to write an article about how to be a good boss, how to be a good mentor in particular. And this journalist had talked to someone who used to work at Intel. And the guy said, Andy Grove changed my life and with this conversation. And Andy was like, I don't know if I should talk to this journalist because I don't even really remember that. But he said, I do remember that this guy and I were on a business trip together and we shared a cab from the airport to the fab. And he asked me a question and I just listened to him and I answered like I just gave him a moment of my time. So much of radical candor is about just being present for these moments. It doesn't actually even necessarily have to take much extra time. It's about these impromptu 2-minute conversations that you're having with people and soliciting feedback. You want to give praise, more praise than criticism. Because you want your job as a leader is to paint a picture of what's possible. So we were starting off at the beginning of this conversation talking about the importance of praise. The purpose of praise is to help people know what to do more of, and often they don't know. And also to have these quick 2-minute conversations where you show the person that you notice their humanity and you're telling them this thing because you want to help them succeed. It's not. It's kind of common sense, and yet we don't want to do it. Not people want to be radically candid, but nobody wants in the moment when you have to have that 2-minute conversation. Nobody wants to really do it in the moment, and it's about overcoming that reluctance because it's uncomfortable.
I think that point that you made about not actually remembering the conversation, the number of times people have said that, like you said this thing and it changed my life, and I was like, what thing might that have been? Because that feels like overweight to what I might remember. When I was leaving my last role at SuccessFactors, I had a few people say, well, the first week when you met with me, you said something and it changed the course of whatever. Now, that first week, you're meeting with like thousands of people and taking all the notes and all of that. Like your ability to remember what each interaction was is, at least for me, is just really
hard.
Not gonna be super possible to have that fine-grained memory. But to your point, the ability to take seriously being in that moment and paying attention in that moment and seeking to understand what the other person is dealing with or caring about or feeling in that moment, I think is such an important skill. And I think as we move towards the future, this is a skill that I think everybody should be investing in more, because as we try to support organizations and individuals and ourselves in this moment where there is all of this disruption, taking the time to hear each other and to really reflect back what we're feeling and thinking, I think is really powerful.
It's such a hard moment to be a leader. I often am just so grateful I don't have a big operating role right now because it's hard out there right now. And I think that remembering not to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders and to be like you will be happier going through each day if you are open to the people around you than if you're trying to shut yourself off. I remember when I was coaching Dick Costolo when he was the CEO of Twitter, he said somebody came up to him and said, you seem like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. So there's stuff I want to come up to you and talk about as you're walking from point A to point B, but I don't dare because you look so. And he said, how can I present more openly? Like, and he did some really interesting things. First of all, he took time to think. And he had a little bit fewer meetings every day, but he took that time to sit in his office alone and think. Because you need to be alone. It's a very extroverted job. So whatever alone time you need, take. And then he would schedule time to walk around with no agenda. He wasn't racing from point A to point B. So try to book some time for yourself to just walk around and be present with the people in your organization who might want to talk to you, but it's hard. You have a lot of people coming at you and you're only one person. When I was writing Radical Candor and talking about being a coach, somebody warned me, if you're not careful, Kim, you're going to be breastfeeding all of Silicon Valley. And I was like, oh, no. And I had twins at the time, Um, so the male leaders out there may not understand how that, but they have the same problem that I had. Like everybody wants a bit of you, and you're only one person.
And you can feel really depleted at the end of that if you're not.
Yeah, so you got to figure out how to get energy out of the random question that the person asked you.
About 2 years in, you made some slight tweaks to the radical candor framework. And then years later, you had another revelation, which led to radical respect. So tell us a little bit about that evolution. What did you discover and what did you want to share with the world?
If you write a book about feedback, you're going to get a lot of it. And indeed, I did.
Very radically.
Yes. And the sort of mistaking radical candor, using it as excuse to act like a jerk was some of the early feedback. But hands down, the best feedback I got about the book came a little bit after that. I was invited to give a talk at a tech company in San Francisco. And the CEO of that company had been a colleague of mine for the better part of a decade. She's a person I like and respect enormously. So I was so excited to go and give a talk to her team. And when I finished, she pulled me aside and she said, Kim, I'm excited to roll out radical candor. I think it's going to help me build the kind of innovative culture that I want. But I got to tell you, it's much harder for me to roll it out than it is for you. And she went on to explain to me that as soon as she would offer anyone, even the most gentle, compassionate criticism, they would call her an angry Black woman. And I knew this was true as soon as she said it. And I knew how unfair that is. She's one of the most cheerful, reasonable people I've ever worked with in my career. And so there's only one explanation for why people would say that. That's bias. So as soon as she said that to me, I had 4 different realizations at the same time. The first was that I had not been the kind of colleague that I imagined myself to be, that I want to be. I had never considered the toll it must take on her to have to show up unfailingly cheerful and pleasant in every meeting we were ever in together, even though she had what to be pissed off about, as we all do from time to time. I had never noticed and therefore never intervened on her behalf. And I felt bad about that. So that was number one. That was the first thing and most important thing that I realized when she told me that. But the second thing that I realized was that not only had I been in denial about the kinds of things that were happening to her at work, I was also in denial about the kinds of things that were happening to me at work. And I think it was because I didn't want to think of either one of us as victims, And so I was just going through my career pretending that a whole bunch of things, disrespectful attitudes and behaviors, were not happening that were, in fact, happening. And not great especially for the author of a book called Radical Candor, to realize I was pretending. Not only was I not being candid with other people, I wasn't even being candid with myself. But the third thing I realized was that even less than wanting to think of myself as a victim, did I want to think of myself as a culprit. And the thing I was most deeply in denial about was the time when I was the one who had been disrespectful to someone and making it harder than it needed to be for them to get their job done. And then the fourth thing I realized was that as a leader, I always thought of myself, I'm creating these BS-free zones where everybody can do the best work of their life and build the best relationships of their careers. But because I was so invested in that narrative, I was failing to notice when BS was happening, when people were being disrespectful. And so I wasn't doing as good a job as I could have done building the kind of culture I wanted because I was so reluctant to notice disrespect when it happened. And that was what caused me to write Radical Respect and to think about what are the things first of all, what gets in the way of respect? And by respect, I mean the unconditional regard that we owe each other for our shared humanity. I'm not talking about, respect for a skill that you have to demonstrate, but something that is everybody's birthright. So what gets in the way of that kind of respect? And what can we do as leaders? What can we do as upstanders or just observers, colleagues? What can we do when we're the person who is disrespectful? And what can we do when we've experienced disrespect? What are the different things we can do to try to make it better?
One of our big topics for this show is the area of AI transformation, and in particular, how not just the technology side of it, but the human side of it, and what's needed in terms of leadership, in terms of skills, all of that. And we think you have a really cool position as a coach and and mentor of so many leaders. And what we'd really like to understand from you is, how are you looking at what leadership qualities are going to make it and which ones are not going to make it?
I think it's important to talk about leadership skills, not leadership qualities, because a quality, at least to me, feels like something I'm born with, whereas a skill is something you can learn. And I really do believe that leadership is about a series of skills that you can learn and that anyone can learn, actually. I mean, not everybody wants to, but anyone who has interest can learn. Focusing on the human relationships is going to get more and more and more important in this era that we're entering. I mean, who knows what will happen? But one thing I can be sure of is that you're going to be working with other people, like it or not. You're not. I don't think robots. Yeah, I don't think, or you're not, and the robots will be taking over, and then you're going to be playing with other people, maybe. So either way, you're really gonna need to understand how to work with other people if you're going to be a leader of people. And I think that the skills that are needed are one of the most dangerous things about being a leader is you have a little power and you're still human, you still get defensive. And there are few more dangerous combinations than power and defensiveness. And so I think that one of the things that leaders can learn how to do is to solicit feedback, to really find out what's happening so that they're not the last to know, because they're very likely to be the last to know if they don't solicit feedback, and to reward the candor when they get it. And the big problem there is that when I say solicit feedback, what I really mean is you're soliciting criticism. You're soliciting bad news and criticism about what you are doing wrong. And you're going to feel defensive. And you're going to have the power to smack that down. And learning how to lay that power down and reward the candor when you get it. It's not enough not to get defensive. You actually have to reward it. And I think AI can help. People hate role plays. Nobody will do. I mean, I shouldn't say nobody, but very few people, especially leaders, will engage in a role play. It's awkward. You make yourself vulnerable, but you can practice with AI actually. And people will. We've built a radical candor role play agent, and that has been actually quite interesting to see how people engage with that.
And for those role plays, is it like, give me some examples of what
is
types
it just
of role
like
play?
a chat,
So
or is it?
Yeah.
Are you like actually having the conversation? Like the full conversation?
It can be oral. You can have it orally, or you can do it over chat. So it's called Compass. I'll send you a link to it. People are like, I think I was a jerk in that meeting. So tell me I was a jerk in that meeting, and help me practice responding well to you telling me I was a jerk in that meeting. So it does require a little bit of awareness. We haven't yet gotten people engaged. What we could do is say, here are the top 10 things your people are probably saying behind your back. Practice hearing them, We can also get people, the other way that people will use it is we encourage people to write down if you say, do you have any feedback for me? You're wasting your breath. I can already tell you the answer. Oh, no, everything's fine. So write down the question you're going to ask. So you can tell the AI a little bit about the person, and then you can ask the question, And the AI will say, well, that's going to, for what you've described about this person, that's going to feel too aggressive. You need to, say it a little bit more gently or whatnot.
And I think back to your other point is figuring out how to encourage people to want to build these skills, right? I think one of the challenges that we're seeing with leadership, and you tiptoed around this as far as it being a difficult time, is that as a leader, most leaders are confident in their level of skill to have some idea of what's expected of the teams. And where we are today, there is a lot of vulnerability in leadership of, hey, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't know if my job is going away or your job is going away. I don't know how we're going to transform.
Yeah, I was at a conference recently and there was like a whole day on AI. And I can summarize that whole day very succinctly. We don't know what's going to happen. That's it. So I think when you're leading with this much uncertainty, how do you get stuff done? And I think the important thing to remember is that you have a team of people and they know things you don't know. And your job is to make sure that everybody's coming to the table and sharing what they know, because then you'll have a better chance of figuring out what to do about it. And so the get stuff done wheel, starts with listening. Make sure you're using those one-on-ones that you have with folks to really listen to them, to understand what's on their mind. This is not the time for you to give feedback. It's not the time for you to tell them what to do. It's your time to ask questions and listen. Let them, because new ideas are so easily squashed. And so this is a time to help people clarify their new ideas. And then you want to make sure that you're really helping them clarify those new ideas before they get put into the rough and tumble of debate or discussion. And it's important also, I think, to remember the difference as you're creating a culture of debate on your team, because that's how you're going to get to the best answer. But there may be a little noise, a little friction, but if you put your heads together, if you collaborate, you're gonna better navigate the unknown than if you're all on your own pulling in different directions. But a big part of creating this culture of debate is making sure that you're clear in your mind and that you help your team be clear in their minds. The difference between criticism and debate. Criticism needs to happen in private. Debate and discussion obviously need to be in public.
I want to bring forward kind of like a specific scenario that's happening right now. We're experiencing the SaaSpocalypse, right? And one of the things that has recently happened is that Workday has brought back the founder, Anil Bushri, to be the CEO. And everyone's like, oh, yay. This is the time when you need a founder because only the founder can really have clarity of vision and get everybody to do the new thing. And so what Meg and I have been discussing is that basically these SaaS companies, they need a top to bottom change, right? They need to re-architect, they need to change their go-to-market, they need to change their pricing, they need everything needs to change with their thoughts of what the competitive mode is, everything needs to change. Anil's a smart guy, but he's
not God.
He doesn't know everything. And so if he were your coaching client right now, what would you tell him to do to make the stock go from $129 a share back up to $300 or whatever it was supposed to be? Yeah.
I think the first thing I would say is you are not your stock price. I would spend some time arguing with him about this. That a stock price is not the best way to measure. I think this is one of the problems with our time is so I would say it's a lagging indicator, and I'll put it that way. You need to get involved in the leading indicators, not the lagging indicators, because you've already lost. The score takes care of itself. And so the first thing I would do is I would encourage him to really understand other people's ideas, like not to come to the team with his vision, because he doesn't probably know all the as much as he needs to know about what's happening right now. So he needs to understand other people's ideas and get excited about other people's ideas. He needs to start working beside people. I think both Larry and Sergey came back to Google, and I think it really helped energize people, but not because they had all the answers, but because it was fun to work with them. I will say, like when I was at Google, it was really fun to work with both of them. And their attention on the details of what people were doing, like made people sit up and take themselves more seriously. And that was Steve Jobs used to do that. He would show up at the cubicle of some engineer who had just been hired out of college, and he would ask them about some detail of their work. And he wasn't going there to tell them how to do. He was really curious. He wanted to learn from them. The idea of the technical assistant, so realizing that you're coming in to have a dialogue, not a monologue. You're not. I think if he thinks he's going to come in with all the answers and drive the stock price back up to 300, he's already lost. That's the first thing I would say. And there was a moment when I was at Google and we were changing a part of the front end of AdWords, and that was 99% of Google's revenue. And the team wanted to do it one way, and Sergey Brin wanted to do it another way. And Sergey was like arguing with them, and they were arguing back. And finally he said, okay, just put 5 engineers. Just try my idea, and you can try your idea, and we'll see which one works out better. And they didn't want to do it. They were arguing of why that was a bad idea. And finally, he kind of banged his fist on the table, and he was conceding. But he was like, if this were an ordinary company, you'd all be doing it my way. But thank God this is not an ordinary company. And he let them get their way. Steve Jobs made a really important decision at Apple, but he didn't make it. He actually allowed himself to be overruled on what he wanted, and it was a make or break the company moment. So the iPod team wanted to launch on the Windows platform, iTunes. And Steve Jobs was like, the whole point of iPod is to get people to switch to a Mac. Why would we launch, so he was very much against it. The team argued. He realized he was wearing the team down because he's a very persuasive personality. And so he said, let's switch roles. So he took on the role of arguing, against his own position, arguing for launching iTunes on the Windows platform. And the team argued against it. And eventually he realized they were right. And the rest is history. And so I think the important thing to remember is that you may be wrong. And your goal is not to come in and be right. Your goal is to come in and to collaborate with a group of brilliant people to get to the best answer. And to make sure they're able to execute. Yeah, don't get in their way.
Right. Well, but if you're forcing them to do something they don't believe in, if you haven't been compelling in convincing them, then it's going to be a lot harder to
It's going to be impossible. They're not going to do it. I mean, I remember when shortly after I took the job at Google, I had inherited a team of 5 people, and it was a hot mess. And I knew exactly how to fix it. And I imposed my will on the team, and 3 out of the 5 people quit. Or they didn't quit Google. They just, at Google, if you didn't like your boss, you could go find another one. So they went and found other bosses. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get fired. And I went in to talk to my boss, and she said, when you're she agreed with all my decisions, but she said, you didn't bring the team along. You didn't go through the listen, clarify, debate, decide, persuade, get stuff done wheel. Instead, you just jumped to execute. And if you jump too fast to execute, you're as a manager, you're at the center. Imagine you're spinning a rope and you're at the center. And so if you're spinning the rope, it doesn't feel like you're making any violent motion to yourself. You're just moving your wrist a little bit. But if you're at the end of the rope, it's scary. You're afraid you're going to get flung off. And so you got to remember that about being a leader.
My team is increasingly using AI to produce their work. How do I evaluate and develop people when I can't always tell what's their thinking versus the AI's? And how do I give meaningful feedback on someone's growth when the nature of their work is changing underneath them? What do you think, Kim? You want to tackle it?
Sure. So here's what I would say about this. In some senses, when you are giving people feedback about work that AI has done, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. It's a little bit like giving a manager feedback about what their team has done. They haven't done it all, but their people have done it all, and the buck stops with them. So they're still responsible for the work output. And so in some senses, this makes it much harder. And in other senses, it makes it much easier because there's a little bit less ego involved, maybe. So you can say, this is really interesting. What did you think about how this came? How did you get AI? So ask a little bit about how they did what they did. How did you get AI to do this for you? And that will help educate you about how they're thinking about how they use AI. So now you're not exactly soliciting advice, but you're soliciting their expertise. So you're acknowledging that you're learning from them. And that feels good to people usually. And then you ask them, what they think of the output and how would it have been different if you had to do it yourself. Get them excited about using this to enhance what they can accomplish as individuals. And you don't want to ever make them feel like they cheated for using it, and that can feel tempting. So you want to get excited about the fact that they're using it, and they're automating. You want to get them excited about automating away the parts of the job they don't want to do, and so that they can spend more time doing, really developing the parts of the job that they do want to do. Because the one thing I've noticed about AI is that engineers will say, oh, we don't need any more designers because we have AI. And then the designers are like, oh, we don't need any more engineers because AI gets the first 80% done, but you have to have the expertise to get it 100% of the way done. And so working with people to help them understand that and to help you understand how they're working. And then they can critique, in some senses, the reason why it can make giving criticism about work easier is that they're critiquing the work that the AI did. And then you're brainstorming together about how to solve that problem. So those are some quick thoughts. I don't know, Meg, tell me why I'm wrong.
Love it. So first off, your thing about everybody thinks it's somebody else's job that needs to be disrupted reminds me very much of when my kids were little and I was, a rookie mom, and I asked my 5-year-old, hey, it's almost Christmas. Let's go through your toys and get rid of stuff you don't want. And she proceeded to point to every one of her sister's toys as the perfect candidates to be given away.
Exactly.
So,
and likewise, whenever, people would say oh, we have too many priorities, we're doing too many things. And then we'd say, oh, well, what should we stop doing? Oh, what they're doing.
You should stop doing that.
Yeah. Those other people are so lazy. Yeah.
When I was at Google, there were all these, we called them the wonder kids, these engineers who could really build a rapid prototype. And it was easy to mistake that rapid prototype for a product, but it was not a product. And I think AI does a lot of that.
I love the fact that your recommendation, and I want to build on that, is to really acknowledge that when we're in a moment where individuals are behaving like managers for the AI. And so I think a lot of the tools of how we would coach managers and how we would teach people to be first-line managers without the really hard part of like managing the people side, but managing the work of others side, I think there is a lot that we can lean on. And so I love everything that you were saying. I would add a few more pieces in that. I would continue to have the conversation on the upside, right? The whole point of all of this is to celebrate and ask each of us how we can stretch, how we can do more, how we can offload more, and then focus your curiosity around helping them make sure that in directing the work of others, they're not giving away their own learning and they're not giving away their own ownership of to your point, whatever the results are. And more importantly, to understanding it. And so this is often what happens when people maybe become won-over managers for the first time, and then they kind of lose the plot, and they'll end up in a meeting, and somebody will say, well, how is that happening? And they will not have built for themselves the tools to understand it at enough depth that they feel confident to be questioned about the work of their teams. And so I think it's all of that skill building.
That's a great parallel, Meg. I really love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so many mixed messages of use AI or you'll fall behind, or don't use AI because it's cheating, right? Like, and like both of those are coming together. But obviously the use of AI is really important. And I loved how you put it, Kim, that it's just really about that curiosity, making sure that your team members know that you're deeply interested in what they're learning and exploring and what they're producing and how and why and like what's making them tick, and to be aware, like Meg said, of where are we starting to lose a little bit of our own grasp, and being really vulnerable that this could be happening to ourselves as well. Like it's not just our team members, but it's us as well, right?
When you become a manager of managers, you still need to be able to get 2 layers deep into the work. You need to understand at a depth. You're not going to know everything, but you need to be able to spelunk. And I think with AI, we all still need to be able to spelunk. But if you think, I mean, if you can make this promise and uphold this promise.
I think at this point, though, the AI is getting better and better at doing the higher level tasks. So it's not just the boring stuff. Like AI can actually do a better job of solving problems and writing your paper and your specs and like all of the like cool stuff, right?
But let's figure out what we can do that it can't do. What I can do that it can't do is have a real human conversation with someone.
All right. Are we ready to wrap up?
I think so.
Yeah. I'm ready. Although I'm not ready. I love this conversation and I'd love to keep talking.
I know. It's so
much.
It's
this
so
has
fun.
been just delightful. We really appreciate having you, Kim. And we absolutely want to join your group of people that are using our voices to help out any way we possibly can.
Your books, Radical Candor, Radical Respect, showing here, as well as your podcast, your Radical Candor podcast, which is amazing. Anything else?
Compass.radicalcandor.com. Getting AI to write the feedback and send it in an email is a disaster. But getting AI to help you prepare to have a real human conversation is actually quite useful.
Thank you so much, Kim. I am so excited to see where this year takes us. So let's invent the future together, everyone. I believe in us.
Let's make every day count.
Let's be radically candid.